Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CBP's Virtual Trade Week. I'm Valerie Newhart with CBP's Office of Trade Relations, and we are happy that you are able to join us here today. We have had a jam-packed few panels this week, and today will be no exception. So to get us started, I have the great honor to introduce to you today our newest Office of Field Operations Executive Assistant Commissioner William Ferrara.
Thank you, Valerie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be participating in CBP's first Virtual Trade Week. I think this virtual format is evidence of CBP's dedication to maintaining open dialogue and strong relationships with our trade stakeholders. All of our organizations have had to be resilient and innovative to overcome the challenges this pandemic has presented. In the coming months, I look forward to hearing more about how your organizations have pivoted during these unprecedented times. As some of you may know, this is my second week as the Executive Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Field Operations. I thought I would take this opportunity to share a little bit of my background and some of my most significant career experiences related to trade. Most people know exactly where they were when the 9/11 terrorist attacks occurred. I was working in the Commissioner's Situation Room fielding phone calls and coordinating responses after the attacks. I still have a picture from that day hanging in my office as a stark reminder to never forget. Very late in the evening of September 13th, I answered a call from the White House. The White House was strongly advocating for us to begin processing trade immediately. When the towers fell, our immediate reaction was to clamp down the border to travel into trade, and everything crossing the border was subject to extremely high levels of scrutiny. We were so focused on national security that we failed to see the importance of trade to our economic security. While our initial reaction to choke the borders was incorrect, we have made great strides since that time, working with industry to enhance both national security and economic security. In 2002, I was fortunate to be part of the team that created CTPAT. As an agency, we recognized that securing the supply chain was not something that we could do alone. By applying a whole of government and a whole of industry approach, we were able to do what neither entity could do alone: enhance the economic and physical security of our nation. In February 2016, I was serving as the Director of Field Operations in Chicago. In this role, I had oversight of the DHL hub in Cincinnati, the UPS hub in Louisville, Kentucky, and the International Mail Facility in Chicago, Illinois. We had seen significant increases in workload at all of these facilities with a rise in popularity of e-commerce and when the de minimis entry value was raised from $200 to $800. We immediately noticed increases in the number of low-value shipments. Air cargo volumes increased by over 100%, and express cargo volumes showed double-digit growth. Roughly 85% of these shipments were valued at less than $800. In many ways, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated this growth as more and more Americans rely on direct consumer purchasing. Managing this growth is yet another daunting task. To meet this challenge, we need to have clear priorities. While I've only just begun to serve as the Executive Assistant Commissioner for OFO, I have very clear priorities for our organization. Earlier this week, you heard the Commissioner speak about and recommit to three things: 1, transparency; 2, communication; and 3, collaboration with you, our trade stakeholders. You will see that my priorities for OFO are complementary in many ways, and they are directly linked to the agency's enduring mission priorities. Finally, I would like to note that while I have 5 priorities, they are not ranked in order. Number 1, OFO will advance national security. We are uniquely positioned to enhance the safety of our country. We will be exceptionally focused on addressing the threats posed by counterintelligence activities, terrorism, transnational criminal organization, and others who wish to do us harm. Number 2, OFO will facilitate lawful trade and travel. We will be facilitation-minded, enabling the timely movement of the compliant trade and continue to enhance the passenger experience for legitimate travelers. Number 3, OFO will foster transparency and collaboration. We will be open about what we are doing and why we are doing it. We will partner across the agency, within the U.S. government, and with external stakeholders. Number 4, OFO will be innovative and forward-looking. Our work and the threats we face are ever evolving. We will be agile and progressive in how we approach our mission and our challenges. Number 5, OVA will invest in our people. Our employees are our most valuable asset. As such, we all must continue to promote unity, recognize and celebrate accomplishments, and facilitate continual growth. With several of these priorities, the implications for trade are clear. I would reiterate that we will advance both economic security and physical security. It is my plan and my priority. We cannot do this alone. We will be clear about what we are doing and look for ways to continue to partner with you. I hope you've enjoyed the information presented over the last 2 days and you find today's information valuable. With that, I would like to turn the discussion over to today's moderator, Cargo and Conveyance Security Executive Director, Mr. Thomas Overacker. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you, AC, and welcome. For everybody out there today, I hope you're all safe and well, especially all of you in the West. I'm thinking about the folks in California, Oregon, Washington State who are experiencing the fires. So please stay safe. We want to see you again when we do this the next time. I'd like to thank Val Newhart and her team, Michael Schreffler especially, from the Office of Trade Relations, and of course the entire production team who are putting together this virtual event. This has become somewhat of a new normal for me. I'm typically out on the road, speaking in front of large groups, and doing that standing behind a podium. But over the last 6 months, I've done most of my speaking from this office at the Ronald Reagan Building. It's been quite a different experience to try to figure out how to navigate this sort of environment of exchange of information and interaction with stakeholders when you can't actually reach out and touch them. But that's where we are today. I do want to say one thing about this event that we're having right now. This is now the 8th different software package that I've had to use when addressing a large group such as this. And we all know what the most important thing you need to know when addressing such a group, and that is, where's the mute button? So hopefully all of our panelists know where the mute button is and we can get this thing off without a hitch. Now, before we actually get started, I want to give you guys a couple ground rules. First of all, if you lose your connection, don't panic. Try to refresh your browser. That would be the first thing we're going to ask you to do. The second thing I want to point out to you is at the bottom of your screen, you will see some icons. And if you take your mouse and hover over those icons, they'll basically tell you what they are. So we have an icon that looks sort of like an ear with a line crossed through it. That's for closed captioning. If you don't want to hear me speak and you just want to read along, click on that and you will be able to follow the entire session. Next to that, we have a thing that looks like, pieces of paper. Well, that's our resources page. From there, you can download a one-pager that explains what this session is all about. You can also get the bios of the panelists that are here today. And most importantly, the one I want to really point out to you is that one that has these little pop-up boxes with the Q&A in it. That's exactly what it sounds like, questions and answers. So at any time during the panel, and you don't have to wait till we start, if you have questions about e-commerce for us, begin to submit your questions now. We have a crack team of folks that are going to go through those questions, and we will try to answer as many as we possibly can during the time allotted for this session. So with that, let's get started. I mean, we have a really great panel here today. E-commerce is quite the topic, and I know it's something that's on everybody's minds. So before we start, let me introduce who we have on our panel. So with us today, we have Ted Henderson. He's Director of Customs, United States for Expeditors International and is responsible for strategy, structure, and operations of Expeditors U.S. Customs product. He has over 25 years of experience in the field of international trade compliance, and over his career, he has been responsible for a number of areas and initiatives, including customs brokerage, global trade compliance, government business, supply chain security programs, and U.S. foreign trade zones. Mr. Henderson is a licensed customs broker and, believe it or not, a former import specialist with the United States Customs Service. Today, we also have Rory Heslington. Rory serves as an international trade policy advisor to the U.S. Senate Committee on Finance under Chairman Chuck Grassley, senior senator from Iowa. Rory joined the Finance Committee in January 2015, advising on international trade matters, including trade negotiations, digital trade, e-commerce, customs, trade facilitation, and other policy areas. Prior to joining the committee, Mr. Heslington worked in the private sector, managing political polling and market research projects, as well as in leadership development industry. We also have today Brandon Lord. Brandon serves as the Deputy Executive Director of CBP's Trade Policy and Programs Directorate in the Office of Trade. He is responsible for policy, enforcement priorities, and stakeholder outreach related to CBP's priority trade issues. Mr. Lord also directs CBP activities related to Section 201, 232, and 301 trade remedies. He is now directing policy for our two ongoing data pilots, the 321 data pilot and the entry type 86 pilot. Brandon has over 10 years experience with CBP. And last on our panel, we have Jim Swanson. Jim is currently serving as Director of Cargo Security and Controls Division for the Office of Field Operations. In that capacity, he has responsibility for cargo release, bonded facilities, our ACE cargo development process, as well as all cargo export oversight. He was previously the Area Port Director in Baltimore, Maryland. And Jim started his career 29 years ago in 1991 as a customs inspector in Detroit, Michigan. We wouldn't have a trade day or any other event if we didn't have Jim Swanson on a panel. So now let's dive into what we're going to talk about today, which is, of course, e-commerce. I think we all recognize that our lives have changed dramatically, both recently, but over the last few years, as e-commerce has really taken hold in our economy. So one thing I want to talk a little bit about is this concept of how technology adoption occurs, because we've seen adoption of e-commerce as a technology come full force in recent months. So some folks explain technology adoption as a life cycle that can really be summed up in the form of a classic bell curve. And on this bell curve, on the left side of the bell curve, you have the enthusiasts and the innovators. These are the people who create this new technology, and they are right out front. And there's really only about 2.5% of the population that we could consider enthusiasts or innovators. But next to them, we have the visionaries or the early adopters. You know these people. These are the folks that stand in line to get the latest phone. They want to be right out in front of everything. And that's about 13.5% of the total universe of folks, those visionaries and adopters. In the middle of the bell curve, when that bell curve reaches high and at its peak, you have pragmatists, or the early majority, which is about 34% of the population. And then next to them, you have conservatives, or the late majority, the folks that recognize that change is coming, so they're going to get on board. And then last, on the far right of that bell curve, at the lowest point, you have what they call the skeptics, or the laggards. That makes up about 16% of the population. So I can tell you from my own personal life experience, I'm in that group. I am a natural laggard. I'm the last person to adopt any new technology. But I can tell you, e-commerce is something that I am fully engaged in right now. And to give you one example of that, last night, I had a restaurant meal for the first time in 6 months. I did it by ordering it on my phone and having it delivered to my home. So if I'm in the middle of e-commerce, everybody's in the middle of e-commerce. Of course, we're not talking about that type of e-commerce on this panel. We're talking about cross-border e-commerce. But let me give you a couple of things to think about. Last month, we had stakeholder meetings with a whole host of different groups. But one theme that we heard over and over again is this idea that the COVID-19 pandemic has propelled e-commerce into the future. At one time, we had folks telling us we are now 3 to 5 years ahead of where we thought we would be as a result of COVID-19. So let me throw out some numbers for you. Last month, the U.S. Census Bureau announced that the estimate of U.S. retail e-commerce sales for the second quarter of 2020 was $211.5 billion. That was an increase of 31.8% from the first quarter and a whopping 44.5% for the same quarter last year. The Census Bureau also reported what they call the penetration level of e-commerce, which they estimate is now is 20.8%. What does that mean? That means that today, 1 out of every $5 spent is spent online. Again, from our purposes, we're looking at that cross-border e-commerce, the kind of stuff that retailers and e-tailers are involved in. When you buy a product and have it sent to your home, that product had to come from somewhere, and it probably crossed the border. Now, there are multiple business models that affect e-commerce. Some of them are very much the traditional way we think of things. Goods coming by container, going to distribution centers or warehouses, and then either being put on shelves or being put online, and until someone buys them, and then they're delivered. But we also have what we see as direct-to-consumer foreign shipping, where someone buys something online and it gets sent directly to their home. Those types of shipping are typically small packages, and we see those in the express environment, the air cargo environment, the truck environment, and even in international mail. So that is really the biggest change that we're seeing. And that's the sort of revolution that we're trying to grapple with when it comes to e-commerce. I can tell you this, as far as I'm concerned, what we're seeing now with e-commerce is the biggest change in shipping that we've ever seen since the development of the intermodal container in the 1950s. And one thing I want to say about the development of the intermodal container in the 1950s is that it took 20 years from the time we started using intermodal containers to where ISO promulgated actual standards and the International Maritime Organization implemented standards. So 20 years to get from the idea of the intermodal container to where it was actually fully in operation. We don't have 20 years for e-commerce. It's coming on like gangbusters, and it's coming on faster and faster every day. So what does that mean for us here at CBP? Well, one thing it means is we have to be agile, and we have to be able to adapt to this constant change, and we have to be able to adapt to this accelerated growth. I said before that some of our stakeholders told us that COVID has propelled us 3 to 5 years into the future. Well, based on those numbers that I read off from the Census Bureau, I would say we're even far beyond 5 years into the future. So what we have to do as an agency is to position ourselves for where we're going next and what the future will be. In other words, we can't be on the wrong side of that bell curve I talked about. We can't be the laggards. Instead, we got to be on the side of the curve where we're the innovators and the creators and the people who are leaning forward as we go into this brave new world of e-commerce. And with that, let's get to our panels. So in 2018, CBP issued our e-commerce strategy. At that time, we thought we were out in front of things. But a lot has transpired since 2018. And so right now, I'd like to bring on Brandon Lord and have him give us a sort of a background on how did we get here, Brandon? You know, what are we experiencing? And how did we get to where we are today? So with that, take it over, Brandon.
Great. Thank you very much, Executive Director Overacker. I appreciate the introduction. Good afternoon to everybody out there. It's great to be with my fellow panelists today, and I thank everyone in the virtual audience for taking time to join us. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of de minimis and how we arrived at the present day opportunities and challenges that we're jointly confronting. And when you think about de minimis, I'm really going to talk about it in 3 different phases. The history of de minimis prior to TIFTIA, the effects of TIFTIA on CBP operations, and recent events. And so just to begin, I always like reminding folks of the purpose of de minimis. So the purpose of de minimis is to avoid the administrative expenses and the inconvenience of the trade to collect what amounts to be a very small amount of revenue. And this was first codified in United States law in 1938 with the Customs Administrative Act of 1938, which at the time transformed what was a policy exemption into law. Any article less than or equal to $5 was considered de minimis and not subject to duties. That amount was raised to $10 in 1953 with the Customs Simplification Act. And then again with the Customs Modernization Act of 1993, or NAFTA, it was raised to $200. Then in 2016, Congress and the President signed into law TIFTIA, the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, which raised the de minimis to $800. It was signed into law February 24th, 2016. And within 15 days, per the law, Customs and Border Protection raised the de minimis in our systems to $800. It was a Herculean effort, and a lot of folks were behind its success. And that took effect March 10th, 2016. In recent years, the United States, like many other countries in the Western world, has witnessed the rapid growth of e-commerce, which revolutionized the way goods are bought and sold around the world. Since 2000, the number of Americans shopping online has increased fourfold. Worldwide e-commerce sales are projected to reach $4 trillion by 2020. So not surprisingly, with these trends and with the passage of TIFTIA raising de minimis to $800, CBP is seeing corresponding volume increases at our ports of entry. In 2015, shipments valued at $200 or less totaled approximately 134 million. By 2016, that number had increased 65% to 220 million. And last year, 2019, CBP processed over 600 million small packages, which is nearly 2 million packages a day, roughly triple from what we saw in 2016. I have to stress to you all that we don't believe this is going to change, especially in the age of COVID. You just heard XD Overacker's story. I know that I have certainly taken advantage of e-commerce since working from home as well. And as XD Overacker mentioned, the Department of Commerce in their recent report shows that second quarter retail e-commerce sales this year increased 45% over last year's time. So this is a trend that is not going away. Unfortunately, this growth has opened the door for counterfeiters to expand their businesses from street corners and flea markets to these e-commerce marketplaces. Small shipments arriving in the United States can deliver dangerous products, such as illegal firearms products or counterfeit pharmaceuticals, counterfeit auto parts to unsuspecting customers. And we see this in our enforcement results. From 2003 through 2018, IPR seizures increased from 6,500 to 33,810. And in 2018, those seizures were valued at $1.4 billion. Last year in FY19, we set our historical record. The value of our IPR seizures was $1.5 billion. As a result of this environment, what we've realized is we've seen an environment spring up where e-commerce platforms, third-party marketplaces, and their supporting intermediaries have served as powerful stimulants for the trafficking of counterfeit and pirated goods. It's a low cost to list a product online, low cost to sell, and there's little expectation on anybody's part to understand or learn what are considered founding customs procedures. On top of that, the supply chains and business models that feed these sellers and online marketplaces are constantly evolving. To better understand this environment, in late 2018, CBP convened an e-commerce task force consisting of industry participants to better understand and evaluate these challenges. The task force accomplished three things. It mapped business models in the e-commerce world. It identified parties responsible for the sale and movement of goods within these models. And it also identified which parties had access to and were best positioned to provide additional data that could better help CBP assess risk. Out of that work, CBP announced the Section 321 data pilot in July 2019. That pilot is testing the collection of new data types from non-traditional parties such as e-commerce platforms and is helping us to determine if that data will assist CBP in better risk segmentation with more accurate data. Or put simply, can this data truly help us better understand who is sending the package, what is in that package, and who is actually receiving it? In addition, CBP began its entry type 86 test in September 2019. That test explores the ability for the trade to provide PGA message data associated with small packages in the de minimis environment. It also grants greater visibility into de minimis packages for our PGA partners while still meeting the regulatory requirements and the congressional intent of the de minimis statute. The Section 321 data pilot and the entry type 86 tests have yielded more than 150 million shipments providing enhanced data. This enhanced data has improved CBP's ability to more quickly and accurately assess risk within the de minimis environment. This includes assessing risk for counterfeit COVID-19 test kits and PPE equipment. The lessons learned from these tests will assist CBP in working to modernize the enforcement and facilitation framework in the de minimis environment to meet the challenges of the e-commerce era. CBP will leverage results from both of these pilots to mandate new cargo safety and security data elements for all shipments. And with that, I'd like to close by stressing the importance of continued CBP and trade community collaboration in this space. I'd like to thank all of our trade partners who have volunteered for either the Section 321 pilot, the entry type 86 test, or both. With your help, I truly believe that CBP is at the beginning of something transformational to meet these challenges. As XD Overacker mentioned, we do not want to be the laggards in this space, and we're counting on your assistance and cooperation and partnership to help us get there. I thank everyone again for taking the time to be here today. I look forward to your questions, and with that, I'll turn it back over to XD Overacker.
All right, thank you, Brandon. And it's a great wrap up of sort of how we got here. So now I want to turn to Jim Swanson. I said earlier, we couldn't have a trade event without Jim Swanson on the dais. So Jim, can you tell us where we are actually right now with respect to e-commerce? What things do we have in the fire, and what are we looking to do?
How do we fit this into what are our primary responsibilities as an agency, which is to protect people, at least in the importation space, to protect them from illicit merchandise, the introduction of bad things into the country. Since we started this process, and with the rapid growth of e-commerce, we were quite frankly caught a little flat-footed. Our traditional processes of importation, as Brandon said, were focused on relationships between shippers and consignees, between overseas manufacturers and the retailers and or distributors and or manufacturers domestically who were utilizing that. And as a result, we had a great deal of information based on history, based on account-based processes, et cetera, that gave us that information. Going forward, we really were dealing with at a distance type transactions where the people in the transaction weren't necessarily known. They were people that were working at arm's length with their business partners overseas, oftentimes not even being aware that they were importing goods from foreign. They were quite frankly buying something online and expected it to be delivered from a local facility, not even sometimes maybe aware that the merchandise originated overseas, but had assumed it had come in, and just like with their normal retail, they were buying it from a domestic source. So what that meant was with the hundreds of millions of packages arriving in the United States and an ever-growing pile of these packages coming in, on top of the fact that the traditional risk assessment processes, which have served us well since 9/11, have served as well as an electronic process for the traditional model, but we saw that they weren't quite up to par in terms of identifying these shipments because of it's such a broader scope of people. We needed additional information, and we need a better way to collect that information and to assess that risk and to apply that assessment to our everyday transactions. So just the sheer number, if you're thinking in terms of what we're looking at, it's like a person standing at the base of Everest trying to work their way through. And how do you climb that mountain? You do it a step at a time and a foot at a time. And that's where we started here. What we've done though is we took a very strong analytical approach, both with our e-commerce task force and some other work that we looked at and said, what are the needs here? We need additional information for risk assessment. And we need additional processes to allow us to deal with all of this cargo. What we were seeing in the ports were that shipments were coming into the United States, 10,000, 15,000 packages at a time, multiple times a day on an airplane. And it was taking between 5 and 8 days for us to manually process all of that, apply the risk assessments, and work our way through the process, meaning we were never catching up. And as things grew, the problem became worse. It also meant a significant amount of money lost to people outside of CBP, to the industry, who were being basically working to try to get that into the hands of the consumers as soon as possible. And so various business models began to evolve in order to deal with that. And we had to work within those business models and to try to figure out how to maintain the momentum, how to not cause this entire pyramid to collapse on us. So what we had to look at was, what can we do that provides this? And as Brandon brought up, the 321 pilot was an attempt to look at a variety of data elements, including things like foreign sellers, foreign manufacturers, who goods are going to, what specific descriptions of those goods, and also leveraging information like photographs, et cetera, to give us a better idea of what it was. We also had to have some visibility into who it was going to and some of the third parties that would be involved in that transaction as well, so that we could make proper risk assessments based on that information to identify not just things from a national security perspective, which are extremely vital and mission number one, and not just to look at enforcement perspective, which is also vital. And this was for a while, this was a major piece of how fentanyl and other dangerous drugs were coming into the country. Specifically, opioids and synthetic opioids were coming into the country via e-commerce type operations. And then the final piece of this was legitimate trade enforcement issues, the ones that everybody deals with every day, like buying counterfeit goods inadvertently. While it sounds like it could be relatively benign, imagine if you were buying brakes for your car and you thought you were buying top of the line brakes, and it turned out you bought a set of counterfeit brakes that failed after the first use. That's something that we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect the health and safety of American consumers as part of this process and to prevent those kind of things from coming into the United States. So to do that, we needed the information. We needed to know who the parties were that were involved. We needed to have some idea of what kind of screening methodology they used, et cetera. On the back end of that, we needed the process that allows us to electronically clear those goods so that it puts us in the same frame as everything else. Because what we found is we cannot, based on 600 million packages coming into the United States on an annual basis, we can't examine our way out of this. Our traditional method was we would establish the risk, the highest risk got examined, and we would continue to operate in a functioning environment beyond that. The problem is 600 million just is too big and the risk was too high. We had to come up with new methodology. So what we've done is we've now run the 321 data pilot since last year, and we've come up with about 50 million packages have been reviewed using the information from the data pilot. And we've deemed that we got a lot better information and that the information was usable. In addition, we looked at the Type 86 entry, where we've cleared, to beginning of September, we've cleared over 100 million packages, over 100 million individual shipments electronically, and received information like HTS numbers and other things that allowed us to share data with our PGA partners, as well as do some additional risk assessment from a trade enforcement perspective, and has allowed us to grant quicker clearance. Instead of the 6 to 8 days, we're looking at arrival for many cases. So a lot of this has been examined, we've reviewed it electronically, and we've released it upon arrival in the United States. However, we've looked at this, we've kind of cobbled something together here that is a new process where we got information voluntarily from a group in a pilot process. We also took our traditional process of entry and pared it down to fit the requirements of Section 321, filed a National Customs Automation Prototype test for Type 86 entry, and kind of cobbled these together to kind of look at where we were from a risk assessment perspective. And what have we found from that? One is that the advanced information and the detailed information has been highly effective from our perspective. The electronic clearance is an important piece of this process, and that from a U.S. government perspective, the ability to be able to give visibility to all of our government partners to do their missions from a health and safety perspective work. So in the future, what we're working on now, and many of you have heard previous discussions around it or other, and while I can't get into too many specifics, we are looking at what a hybrid's going to look like. What kind of process can collect this additional information from the party who owns it, get it in an early enough time frame for safety and security and enforcement perspective, but to also apply all of the necessary trade enforcement issues that we need to, all of the necessary trade enforcement screening we need to do, and to ensure that the products that come through are safe. They don't create a threat to national security. They don't contain narcotics or other dangerous substances, and that they are not containing counterfeit products, specifically those like counterfeit pharmaceuticals and counterfeit auto parts and other high-risk items that you put into your body or that you use around your body to protect yourself and to protect your family, those are all the legitimate products that work as advertised. So NETA pilot has been the answer in and of itself. But what we do need to do is look forward and come up with and we're working on coming up with a future fix that's both regulatory and will be driven by the data collection and the process. We're continuing to work with our trade partners to kind of identify some of that, and we will be providing more information on that fairly quickly. The other key thing we've discovered, though, is that part of this process is there has been some confusion as to where the eligibility for Section 321 lies. And we're doing some work around that area, working with our trade partners to get to solutions around those areas for those who are to make sure that the people who are claiming Section 321 privilege are actually meet the requirements of the law, and to see if we need to make any additional changes in regulations and or recommend any changes to Congress in that area as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Overacker.
All right. Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that. So what about the future? Where are we going from here? And for that, I want to bring in our non-CBP participants, if I may. So Rory Heslington, who works for the Senate Finance Committee, typically when I'm talking to him, he's asking me the questions on behalf of Senator Grassley. This time, I'm going to turn the tables and I'm going to ask him some questions. So Rory, from the Hill's perspective, and we rarely have somebody from the Hill at some of these sessions, we really want to pick your brain and get your insight. What is the Hill thinking about the future and how e-commerce fits into that future? And what policy changes or things should we anticipate going forward?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, thanks to Overacker. And thanks for having me on the panel. You know, the Finance Committee and Chairman Grassley have long had an interest in the e-commerce environment. You know, as has been mentioned in 2015, you know, Congress passed TIA, you know, and that provided CBP a lot of new authority to do enforcement. It also did, you know, raise the de minimis level to $800, as has been said. You know, provided authorities to, you know, do additional IPR enforcement actions, and authorize CBP to share information with rights holders once CBP suspected infringing goods has been imported. You know, and I think these are all things that we're still working on to get up and running, and, you know, we've been pleased with CBP's progress thus far. You know, one thing that's been an interest of the committee that I would like to mention is that, you know, that the U.S. has been the leader in e-commerce for quite some time, and I think it's in the interest of the U.S. economy to remain the leader. And so with that, I do want to touch base on de minimis. You know, within the Congress, de minimis still enjoys wide bipartisan support. We believe it's been one of the key factors that's made the U.S. You know, the leader in the world for e-commerce. You know, we believe that the $800 threshold cuts red tape and allows for expedited clearance of goods below that threshold, and allows consumers and small businesses to expeditiously receive products that they've purchased. But that being said, you know, there are some hiccups, and we'll need to do some things to find a way to address those issues. The first thing that we've done is, at least on the Congressional side, the Finance Committee late last year released a report on counterfeit goods in the e-commerce environment. In that report, we surveyed dozens of companies and trade associations that were, you know, that are highly involved in the trade of e-commerce, especially cross-border trade. And we asked them a number of questions regarding the challenges that they have in policing counterfeits and fakes, how it affects their businesses, what their interactions were like with the government and the platforms and the shippers and the payment processors, and try to get a good idea of what seems to be working and what doesn't. So there's a few findings from the report that I'd like to highlight I think are relevant to this discussion. Some of which may be obvious to those of us that think about e-commerce regularly, but I still think they're worth noting. Counterfeit goods pose a threat to health and safety, you know, whether it's counterfeit cosmetics, water filters, toys, auto parts. You know, all these things can have an effect on our daily lives. Everything can and likely is counterfeited, and consumers need to take caution when buying goods from unknown sources. You know, I think there's a lot of trust in a lot of, you know, the sellers on these platforms, and in many cases that tends to not be the case. One of the other findings from the report was that across the board, rights holders said the burden of policing counterfeit products on the platforms falls too heavily on them. This is especially a problem for small businesses that don't have the resources to constantly police the platforms for infringing products. While I should note, since the release of the report, we have seen a number of improvements on the platform side, but I still think there's more that could be done. The report also found that there needs to be more information sharing between the government, you know, the rights holders, the platforms, and everyone involved in the supply chain. I think this information sharing would go a long way to help CBP and the U.S. government as a whole, go after the bad actors in this space. It's something we'll have to do surgically, because we need to make sure we're protecting business confidential information and personally identifiable information. But it's something we're definitely taking a look at. So what is Congress doing now? We're looking at what additional authorities are needed by CBP and ICE and other agencies beyond what was identified in the report, namely to facilitate information sharing between the government and what is needed and what's needed to be shared. We're continuing to consult with CBP, DHS, and all the stakeholders so we can craft something that's both administrable and doesn't hinder growth of the strong U.S. e-commerce economy. That being said, it's never easy to get things done like this in Congress. So, we'll continue to work toward that end. And then lastly, we're looking at ways to increase transparency on a number of fronts. Whether it's within the private sector or within government, and how in the modes that these goods are coming in, among all those areas. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention COVID-19, since this is still something we're all dealing with. Since the pandemic outbreak, the committee has done 2 hearings, one of which XD Overacker had the pleasure of testifying at and being grilled at. The hearing highlighted some of the threats that have been mentioned here, and how the pandemic has exposed the vulnerabilities of a supply chain that is concentrated into one place. It showed that that having any bottlenecks in supply chains creates vulnerabilities that just aren't acceptable for going forward. So we're looking at ways that we can incentivize companies to build resiliencies within their healthcare supply chains, especially, without creating a new bottleneck that would become a problem in future crises. Incentivizing a better system for stockpiling essential supplies for use in the future. And again, looking at ways that transparency can be provided into the supply chains. And then the committee's also recently instigated a Section 332 investigation with the International Trade Commission. Chairman Grassley, along with his colleagues at Ways and Means, have asked the ITC to identify medical goods that are most needed to effectively respond to COVID-19 and other future crises. And we hope what the ITC provides back to Congress and the administration can help, all of us make decisions that will aid in relief efforts and to make sure we don't run into similar problems in the future. And with that, I think what we're going to continue to do is to consult with the private sector, as I mentioned, with CBP, to see what additional authorities are needed, what we can do. And with that, I'll turn it back to XD Overacker.
All right. Thank you, Rory. I really appreciate that insight about what the Finance Committee is really thinking about going forward. And I think that's something that the audience needed to hear, so they have a sense of where we want to go as a government, not just from a CBP perspective, but from a regulatory and also a statutory perspective. So thank you for that. Also, thank you for reminding me about that hearing last month. Anytime you have an opportunity to testify before Congress, it can be very stressful. So, but that one in particular was of interest to me only because how it tied in so closely to our topic today of e-commerce. Because with respect to PPE imports, we've seen an explosion in the number of actors in the supply chain. And anytime you introduce new actors into a supply chain, there are potential risks. So with that, let's pivot. Let's talk about a little more about the future. And for that, I want to bring in Ted. Ted Henderson, as a licensed customs broker, you have experiences that we don't have on our side, on the government side, and you're dealing every day with your private sector clients. So tell us, how do you feel things are going in the e-commerce space, and where are we going with e-commerce in the future?
All right, thank you, Executive Director Overacker. May I first say probably the most famous thing that's being said over the last 6 months. May I confirm that I'm being heard right now?
Your audio is fine, sir.
Thank you kindly. All right, so before I get started, I'd like to say thank you to all at CBP for making this virtual trade event happen. I'm pretty confident that I speak for all of us in the trade when I say that we do genuinely appreciate your efforts to deliver a trade symposium in this COVID-19 environment. I think since the very first trade symposium, all of us in the trade have really welcomed this annual opportunity to get together with the leadership of CBP and other government agencies. So again, thank you. And as noted by Mr. Overacker, thank you to the Office of Trade Relations for the effort to put this together. One other thing I do want to also lead off with is to say thank you on behalf of the trade to all CBP officers for all of your efforts really to maintain a stable, consistent environment for international trade here in the U.S. We do clearly recognize that hundreds of officers have contracted COVID-19 in the line of duty, and tragically there are CBP officers who have died from the coronavirus. So again, thank you for your work to keep us all in business. It really is most appreciated, and we wish the best for the CBP families. Really, I think the final note is to say that I am a pinch hitter here for the original panel member who had to step out for a family issue. So we wish the best to Mr. Iacopella and his family, and hopefully I can represent the trade as well as Vince might have during this discussion. So I'll build on a couple of comments that really come from my colleagues on this panel as I'm offering some perspective from the private sector, the trade community's point of view. There's no question when we look at the impact on trade here in the U.S., the e-commerce ecosystem is growing in significance at the same level as the volumes of e-commerce shipments are growing. I think typically we think in the context of the large e-commerce platforms and marketplaces, the express consignment couriers, and no question my colleagues in those sectors are definitely seeing the surge. But there's also an equal impact to traditional forwarders, customs brokers, distribution, fulfillment, warehouse service providers, domestic trucking companies. When we're seeing new logistics providers purely focused on e-commerce rising in the marketplace. I think really just about everyone in supply chain sectors now are involved in our customers' e-commerce business models. And those e-commerce models are more than just B2C. They can be B2B in some of the fulfillment models. There's C2C and even C2B in a returns model. So all sorts of things going on in the private sector right now. And I think the final thing I would say is I'm certainly speaking from the perspective of us in the service provider component of the global supply chain. But I do want to be clear that we've definitely seen the impact on really so many of our customers who are importers and exporters of a whole variety of goods, many of the things that you guys have talked about already that are absolutely critical in our daily lives. I think it's that impact to our customers that ultimately drives the challenges that we face in the global logistics industry as we work to create value for our customers in this new e-commerce ecosystem. So bottom line is that absolutely there is a staggering volume of import activity. CBP, to their credit, I think early on did reach out to the trade to try to work together to figure out how to adapt and apply those traditional practices that Mr. Swanson spoke about that we were using in the old world and try to make them work in this new environment to target for illicit trade, but at the same time facilitate legitimate trade from e-commerce. So I think unfortunately to date, we've yet to find that perfect solution for CBP and the trade in the e-commerce area. I was looking back, we're now completing 3 solid years of effort with representatives from all the key sectors of the trade community, as well as CBP, DHS, and many PGAs rather, to try to address, how we operate in this new model. I can recall the first meeting in early 2017 of the initial e-commerce trade government working group. And then Commissioner McElhannon spending time at that opening session with us, just emphasizing the absolute importance of the trade and government working together to address the surge of e-commerce imports into the U.S. And I think in that same meeting, we were addressed by the Deputy Commissioner, 2 Executive Assistant Commissioners, and multiple other members of CBP's management team. So it was very clear how significant e-commerce was becoming to CBP and the administration. I think I should probably also admit that in that first meeting, I think in February of 2017, we were told that we needed to have a solution delivered by the end of that year. And here we are still working on that solution in September 2020. So as XD Overacker is leading, I think now his third trade symposium panel on this subject, I'm betting he might be talking about it again next year because there just hasn't been an easy solution in this area. The other thing I do want to point out is that e-commerce imports are not just a U.S. issue. We certainly know from our company's work as a global customs broker and our engagement with the WCO Private Sector Consultative Group that this is a central issue for really most customs agencies around the globe. Some cases it's revenue, some cases it's security, but nonetheless, all customs agencies care about e-commerce. So we in the trade do appreciate CBP's engagement with the WCO to really help facilitate some realistic international standards in the e-commerce space. Because again, the challenges we see here in the US, we see everywhere. So last night, as I was being brought into this and trying to prepare my remarks for today, I was thinking about the comments that EAC Brenda Smith made during her presentation yesterday and some of the things that she said when she was speaking to the 21 CCF initiative, and she spoke of seamless data sharing that would lead to better analytics and decisions on risk. And that really is the challenge that we've been collectively working towards over the last year or two with the Entry Type 86 pilot and the Section 321 data pilot. I think the Entry Type 86 pilot was really a great first step to modernize Section 321 release process. And, you know, Mr. Swanson has spoke to that. It moved us away from that traditional manifest release that was typically done in a manual mode. The ET86 pilot also expanded the universe of trade parties who could engage in clearing Section 321 de minimis shipments, and also, you know, streamlined and automated processes for CBP. If you look at the sheer number of Entry Type 86 releases happening every day, it's clear there's value in this initiative. And as a customs broker in the traditional sense, we certainly have appreciated the opportunity to engage in the pilot and to be able to offer additional services for our customers. So we know that ET86 has value, but it is really somewhat limited in that the message set is centered more on basic commercial information, much like a traditional customs entry. I think that the Section 321 data pilot gets more to CBP's interest to gain a better understanding of the parties in the importation, as well as a more precise description of the goods. The Section 321 data pilot is limited to 9 participants, so I can't really speak firsthand about the pilot. But I'll say as part of the e-commerce working group, we get a nice view of the value of the pilot to CBP and the participants so far. And again, it's the volume of the transactions in this pilot that really speak to a certain level of success. But this pilot also has limitations. And in a way, I think the Section 321 data pilot is almost more like a security filing. So we're clearly making progress. We're getting there, but we do need to get to a better message set model. And, you know, folks are talking about this hybrid that we're working towards that benefits both CBP and the trade. So I'd say from a trade perspective, we're definitely looking forward to how CBP is going to take the learnings from the pilots, continue to work with the trade to come to that single data set for the future. I mean, we absolutely know there are huge challenges with getting the necessary data from the key parties in an e-commerce import and really tying it all together into one nice, clean, neat data set. So again, I think, you know, as we've talked about, there's much more to come on that front. You know, with e-commerce, this is clearly, this is in and of itself is all about innovation, innovative thinking. And so I know we've kind of been focused on innovative approaches to managing e-commerce, but I think there really is a place for legacy approaches. So there's certainly an argument for a trusted trader program focused on this space, something that could be part of a layered approach to identify and reward the trade partners who are making the investment and effort in the e-commerce environment. So we look forward to some work in that area as well. I know that after the last 3-4 years of being on these working groups, that some of my colleagues would also want me to point out that e-commerce imports are not just in the domain of the trade participants who are likely involved in this conversation today and on the watching this panel. I know our panel isn't really focused on this area, but I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that the Postal Service has a major role and responsibility given the volume of imports to the postal network. So we know that the administration and CBP are working on this area, and it really is greatly appreciated. I think, frankly, there is a valid concern that if all the players in the courier and traditional forwarder broker environment put measures in place to support CBP in stopping illicit trade, then the bad guys just migrate to another path of least resistance. So we don't want to make things too onerous and too expensive for importers to not utilize the many companies that are involved in the global supply chain. We certainly want a level playing field. That's good for us. But really, realistically, the only way we achieve the larger goal of coming to a secure and streamlined e-commerce ecosystem is for all participants to engage. And finally, the last thing I'd say is I know the gentleman who was originally scheduled for this panel would want me to highlight that e-commerce imports are not something that is limited to the air or truck freight environment. So just a quick reminder that ocean imports really can be just as viable in the e-commerce ecosystem. I mean, we certainly recognize there are hurdles to overcome in this area, particularly related to ISF and AMS filings, but we do appreciate CBP's continued consideration and work with us in the trade in this area. So in closing, I'm just going to go back to really EAC Smith's comments yesterday about how the management of e-commerce imports should be smooth and transparent for all parties. I think we in the trade absolutely understand the reality that CBP faces with e-commerce imports. We fully support fundamental concepts such as intelligent enforcement in this area. And really, we in the trade have invested a lot of time and a lot of our company's resources over the last several years to work towards solutions. And I'd say without question, we're committed to continuing to work with CBP on the challenges and the opportunities related to e-commerce imports. So thank you again, and back to you, XD Overacker.
All right, thank you very much, Ted. I really appreciate that. And I think you're absolutely right when you mentioned that, you're pinch hitting here today, and that's probably the toughest thing anybody can do. But we thank you for joining the panel at the last minute, and also for raising that issue that e-commerce is not just express or mail or air cargo. We see it in every vector, and ocean is still a big part of this. And so I'm glad you brought that up as well. I'm also glad that you touched upon the pilots, and where we are with the pilots. So Brandon has talked about the 321 data pilot and the Type 86 entry test. Jim has talked about the 321 data pilot and the Type 86 entry test. And now you, Ted, have also brought that around as well. And so what I want to do right now is I want to throw it out to Brandon. So where are we now with these two endeavors, the pilot and the test, and what's going to happen next? Is this going to go on forever, or where are we going to actually go next with these two endeavors?
That's a great question. Thank you, XG Overacker. So, the first thing I like to say about these two pilots are, think back to all of everyone's years of dealing with, CBP or the Customs Service. And I challenge anybody to find another time where we've had two simultaneous tests or two simultaneous pilots going on in essentially the same sphere. And I think you'll be hard pressed to find another example. So to me, the fact that these two tests, these two pilots exist, really speaks to the fact that CBP is moving out on learning more in this environment and trying to really answer two pieces to this challenge. The first is, how do we get additional information on a security side to better screen risk in this environment? And then on the PGA side, how do we, if at all possible, provide PGAs with the appropriate data fidelity they need to quickly clear de minimis shipments? Because as we all remember, our de minimis isn't necessarily recognized by every single PGA out there. And so that was really one of the things we were exploring with the Type 86 test. But where are we today? So as I mentioned earlier, we've received 150 million shipments to date with some combination of that data. 50 million with the 321 data pilot and 100 million with the Type 86 pilot. Both of these programs have been successful in terms of data collection and risk assessment. We've seen CBP officers provide several examples to us of where the data from either test has significantly improved their ability to more accurately assess risk, including risk associated with counterfeit imports, medical devices, COVID-19 test kits, and et cetera. So our next phase in terms of where we want to go, we do not want these tests to go on indefinitely. In fact, our goal is to bring these tests to a conclusion, but to do it smartly. And when we bring these tests to conclusion, we want to do it in a way where we're setting up a new framework that puts into place new requirements from a data submission perspective for security and for trade facilitation. But what I'd like to kind of stress here is this is not a data grab for CBP. One of the things that we want to do here is really go back and think through what's the data set that we're asking for in each of these pilots and what's the data set that we actually need. early conclusions for us, just as an example on the A6 side, is that we don't think we need all the data that we're currently asking for in the Intertype A6 environment. What we see in the Intertype A6 environment is a lot of folks are submitting a lot of data. They're then filing a PGA disclaim to say that the good isn't actually regulated by the PGA, and they're getting that electronic release benefit. And we've heard loud and clear from the trade that that electronic release benefit, that clearance benefit, is critical to a lot of the trade stakeholders. So we're asking ourselves, okay, where's that intersection between new data elements on the security side, perhaps from non-traditional partners, say e-commerce platforms? Where does that new security data requirement intersect with what we would need from a trade facilitation perspective to link those together and still provide that electronic clearance? One of the critical things that we've proven through these tests, and the reason why we're thinking in this space, is that we have been successful in linking data provided to us directly from online marketplaces to the traditional manifest data set. So a lot of the questions I hear all the time is, you're asking for a lot of data from a lot of people, can you link it up? The tests have shown that we can actually do that. And we're confident in our ability to do that going forward. The last note I'd like to make, and the reason why we're really excited and feel like we're pointed in the right direction, is we've seen a lot of positive results from both of these tests. So in the Section 321 data pilot, we've had one participant's hold times decrease almost 70%, and another's decreased by almost 60% with that additional security data. Our estimates to date are we've seen that between CBP and the trade, we've saved over $867 million due to the electronic clearance benefit associated with the Intertype A6. So our ultimate goal, like I said, is to collect the bare minimum data that we need to enhance our enforcement capabilities, better segment risk, but also provide for consistency and clarity to you all on the trade side so that you get that facilitative benefit of that electronic clearance.
All right, Brandon, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And just a reminder of some of where we are right now in the program. You can ask a question at any time. Remember, at the bottom of your screen, you have that little Q&A button that you can click on and you ask a question, and we'll try to get through as many of these as we possibly can. So, Jim, we've been talking about the 321 data pilot, and someone asked the question, and I think it's a very good question, because sometimes we think that everybody understands our language and where we are. Can you just walk through what are the requirements to qualify a shipment for release under Section 321 so everybody understands what we're talking about with respect to 321 or 321 pilot?
$800 or less, and there has to be a person in the United States who's receiving those goods, and the value that we were talking about at 800 is an aggregate value, so that person cannot receive more than $800 in a given day in order to maintain their eligibility. From a 321 pilot perspective, we are looking at several data elements that were different than what we were looking at in our current environment, as we talked about before. And I'm sorry, I've got a note here and I'm trying to find it. So the pilot basically establishes a set of data that we thought we could get directly from the foreign sellers and or the platforms that were selling the goods based on the information we knew they had because we could see it online. So it included things like seller's information, who the shipment initiator was, who the shipper was, what the product description, an enhanced product description, not just a gift, which is what we see often, or the electronic equivalent of stuff. What we want to see is that this is a men's large T-shirt made from 100% cotton, and potentially who made it. We would like to be able to have a product picture. The picture allows us to look at it and go, well, does that have a picture of Mickey Mouse, and are they authorized to use the Disney logo? Again, that's an important element when we're going through screening. We also want to look at how much there is and the weight of the product. One of the things we have seen is people have declared $800, $700 worth of stuff to us, and the weight of the packages was 3,000 pounds. And we went in and looked, and it was more like $100,000 worth of stuff. So from an enforcement perspective and a revenue protection perspective, we were able to suss that out using that kind of data. We also wanted to know what the listed price was, because that helps us evaluate the actual price and whether they're allowed, including the retail price. If known, and within it, we wanted additional information on who the consignee was, because the consignee is the person in the United States that is eligible for those goods. And we need that to help determine whether or not they're eligible to take advantage of that requirement. So within that, from that process, what we found was that the person who was actually, most people are going online and buying, sometimes designating who they want to deliver the product, but oftentimes the seller designates that. The platform then handles the process, ships it to the United States, and oftentimes your last mile receipt may be through the Postal Service, all of which means it's all at arm's length to you, and you see what you see as an individual consumer is not all the machinations that occur on the back end and all the commercial transactions that are occurring, but that ultimately there is somebody who is a responsible party who has access to the data and is able to then provide that data to CBP. And that's the parties that we're leaning on most heavily now are the traditional ones. But what we're looking to do is identify there are other parties with more data who are now bringing into the process, and we hope to be able to expand that.
So Jim, just to follow up on that again, you were cut off a little bit when we first started. So don't mute yourself just yet, okay? Okay. Go back and explain again. What are the initial requirements for Section 321? And I'm also going to add a wrinkle to that. Can a commercial shipment be considered for Section 321?
Yes. The important thing to note is the transaction can be either commercial or personal, but it involves not actually bringing the goods in. Whoops. But that the $800 here is, again, an aggregate value of what you're having shipped to you in the United States on any given day. So the key there is it can be a commercial transaction, it can be a gift, it can be any number of things and still fall within that $800 limit. But it has to be shipped from a foreign party to you in the United States. And again, the aggregate value of all you receive in any given day cannot exceed the $800. There can be no tax owed on that, such as alcohol or tobacco is prohibited. Quota products are not allowed to be shipped via Section 321. And because there's an additional tax involved in it, anti-dumping, products subject to anti-dumping are not normally allowed to be shipped via Section 321 either. So it really has to be a kind of a clean transaction coming in. Currently, according to guidelines, things that are subject to trade remedies, except for the quota trade remedies, have not fallen under this. So the Section 301 items have not fallen under Section 321 to this point. Right now, those are also eligible to come in as either personal shipments or as commercial shipments coming from a foreign seller to a U.S. buyer.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit. Rory, I've got a question for you, and I think this is going to be an easy one for you. But somebody wants to know, you referenced this e-commerce report of the Senate Finance Committee. Is that report available to the public? And if so, where can they find it? Is it on the Senate Finance Committee website, for example?
It is. It is available to the public. It's on the Senate Finance Committee website, finance.senate.gov. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there about our recommendations and the people we talk to, and I think it's a quick but good read, I hope.
All right, thank you, Rory. So I'm going to go back to Brandon. Brandon, Jim, in defining what's eligible for Section 321, referenced that there are some things that are exempt from it, things that are subject to Internal Revenue Service taxes like alcohol and tobacco and such. We have several people that want to ask this question, and Jim alluded to it. Is there any effort afoot to change the exemptions to Section 321 to include requirements of 301 duties? And what can you tell everybody that's on listening today about what can you tell them about that?
Yes, that's a great question, and really a topic that's been picked up by the trade industry press, I think, as of about 24 hours ago. So it's always fun to come on these things and have some breaking news within the last day or so. But here's what I can say. So a lot of this information is coming from OMB's website, which has posted that they've received a proposed rule. And it's difficult for us to make a lot of comments on this outside of the normal rulemaking process. So I have to choose my words carefully. But what I will say is, If you go out to that OMB website that's publicly available to everybody that lists the rule package they've received, it is a proposed rule, which means it'll be a notice of proposed rulemaking. So assuming that OMB approves the proposed rule, then that rule will be published in the Federal Register, and there'll be an opportunity for the public to submit comments. I encourage all of you listening today and any interested parties you may know to submit their comments through the Federal Register to CBP if that rule ends up being published in the Federal Register so that we can consider your comments. And that's really unfortunately all I can say at this time, just given the restrictions around the rulemaking process.
All right, but thanks for addressing that. And one other question for you, Brandon, before you go on mute, and that is with respect to the 321 data pilot. I think we alluded to this, and Ted even referenced it in his comments about it. You know, it is currently limited in size and scope to only 9 participants. Are there plans to widen the aperture to include different types of players and actors in this before we go forward with other activities?
Yes. The short answer to that question is yes. In fact, we've had a package, pending regulatory approval to expand past the 9 participants for a few months now. So we continue to check in on that package. Unfortunately, this is just sort of one of the hurdles that we have to go through to get it over the limit of 9. But we do intend to do that. But again, I want to also stress too that we're evaluating the results of the 321 data pilot now. We'll continue to evaluate those results even when it goes past 9. And we're also open for comments and input from folks as we go along this journey, because it is definitely our intent to stand up that new framework that I talked about earlier. This both the framework for enforcement and facilitation in the 321 environment.
If I can interject really quickly, XT Overacker. I just wanted to, I failed to mention that, the committee has been very pleased with the pilots that CBP has been running. We really look forward to see the results of those and continue working with you to expand them if there's anything that we need to do on our side. Excellent.
Thanks, Roy. I really appreciate that. So let's get Ted involved. Ted, you're not going to sit on the sidelines and get no questions. I mean, we brought you here to talk as well. So here's something I want you to kind of address, and because we have a little bit of a continuous thread of little snippets from different people asking this question, and that is the role of the broker, not just with respect to e-commerce writ large, but in particular with what we're talking about with these pilots, whether it's the 321 data pilot or more particularly the Type 86. How has the role of the broker been impacted by e-commerce in general and what we're doing now with these 2 pilots?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Overacker, for engaging me. I was really kind of hoping, since I was having systems issues and we had reverted to just showing a picture as opposed to a video, you might have forgotten about me, but no such luck. So again, thank you. Really, I think really there's absolutely no question that the idea of the legacy traditional customs broker who has been clearing heavyweight shipments, for decades, some companies for 100 years under their license. That certainly, I think when we saw the original surge of e-commerce and the processes that were in place to manage that Section 321 de minimis release, it was extremely challenging for us. There's no question, and made it really as challenging as it was for the folks in the customs ports. It was just as challenging for the folks that were brokers. We were standing in line, waiting at the desk, working with local ports, trying to get our customers' freight moving through this 321 de minimis model. No question, as I was speaking earlier, we're all involved in e-commerce now, and some of that really is thanks to the initiative of the ET86, the Entry-Type 86 pilot. That really opened the doors to all of us to play and participate and support our customers in this environment. And so definitely, that expanded, that gave us that first, if you will, entree into this environment. And from there, I think, we're just continuing to expand our overall strategy. And I'm not speaking specifically about Expeditors. I think in general, I see this across a lot of my colleagues in different companies. We've all developed in some stage an e-commerce strategy within our companies that's much larger than just the transactional clearance activity, which is exciting because, as you noted at the outset, this is the biggest darn deal since us moving to containerized freight. So I mean, this is the area where we do need to be working, and I think I was working on a separate presentation earlier this morning, and there's an expression that I'm using in that presentation, and it's often attributed to Charles Darwin, but it was actually stated by an LSU business professor named Leon Megason, and it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So although I'm not an LSU alum, let me say that all y'all Tigers out there can be proud of that man, but and probably Coach Ogeron too. I'll hear about that later. But really, bottom line, Professor Megason's right. And I'd say that many of us, in the legacy customs brokerage business are absolutely responding to the changes that we're seeing in the e-commerce environment and broadening our breadth of scope in that ecosystem.
All right. Thank you, Ted. Now I have to look up that quote so I can borrow it myself. And so the next time I address a large group and you hear me say that, you'll know where I got it. So a couple of more questions here. And some of them are directed regarding the CTPAT program. And since Director Manny Garza is not with us today, but he did have a panel yesterday. And for all of you out here asking questions about the CTPAT program, I hope you were able to join that session we had yesterday. It was really quite excellent, where we talked about the new minimum security criteria. We talked about how we're doing remote validations. We also talked about forced labor and how we're incorporating that into trade compliance. But a common question that we're getting right now is, what about e-commerce and the CTPAT program? And a number of different ways of looking at that. And so I'm going to take over for Manny Garza and give you just a little bit of insight of what we're thinking with respect to how e-commerce affects the CTPAT program and vice versa. So with respect to just our normal CTPAT program members, those carriers, those freight forwarders, those brokers, those importers that are already part of the CTPAT program, yes, e-commerce is a big part of everything they're doing now. And one of the things that we are trying to do is try to see how we can leverage that part of the CTPAT program, whether it's from a security perspective or from a trade compliance perspective, to make certain that that we can segment those e-commerce transactions out of our risk pool, because these are already trusted partners. And so many of the people who are acting in this space right now, they're all, as far as e-commerce goes, are already part of the CTPAT program. But the other thing we're looking at, and we haven't really arrived at a working model for this yet, is, are there other actors in the supply chain? In other words, the e-commerce sellers or the online or the third-party marketplaces, are those entities that can be part of the CTPAT program? And if they were, what would that look like in terms of what would the benefits that would accrue to them for being part of the CTPAT program? How can we leverage their participation in CTPAT to segment risk and facilitate legitimate trade? So yes, for all of you who have asked and the questions about what about CTPAT and e-commerce, we are looking at that very hard. And that's another one of those things, getting back to my earlier comments about which side of the bell curve are we on. We need to be on the innovative side of the bell curve when it comes to how we incorporate e-commerce and other actors in the supply chain as a result of e-commerce into the CTPAT program. And for those of you who are asking the question, I'm gonna ask you a question. Follow up with us, please do. Give us your thoughts and your ideas on how we can achieve that, how we can get everybody that's acting in the e-commerce space today into the CTPAT universe so that we can segment risk. So thank you for those questions about CTPAT. So now I'm going to switch. I'm going to go back to Jim. So Jim, make sure you got your mute button off and you're ready to go. Our friends from NAFTZ and many others have been asking this question, and I know this is one that you get from time to time. What role can the FTZs play in e-commerce, in particular with respect to Section 321?
So unfortunately for the foreign trade zone industry, there are some statutory prohibitions against them using Section 321 for goods coming out of foreign trade zone. goods coming into the United States, the way the statute is written, it basically applies at the time of importation. Goods going to a foreign trade zone are normally imported in large containerized lots or air container lots or whatever, but they're larger than the normal section. They're the traditional method of bringing goods into the United States. They're then taken out of commerce for the purposes of being input for duty and tax purpose. They're actually removed from the commerce when they're admitted to a foreign trade zone, and then they're entered back into the commerce of the United States when they arrive. Unfortunately, their status for Section 321 and their eligibility, as per a ruling of a couple of years ago, and that was supported by multiple rulings over the years, that they would not be allowed to use Section 321 to bring goods out of a foreign trade zone because they were imported in a condition. That's not the time of import. When they were imported in amounts greater than the $800 and therefore weren't eligible. So I know that many groups out there, NAFTZ, Retail Federation, and others, in order to level the playing field from their perspective, have gone back to Congress and said, can we change the law to create an exemption for goods to come out of the foreign trade zone and be able to compete with foreign partners? Their claim was that many of those, and not just their claim, but evidence has indicated that several companies have established themselves across the borders, and specifically in Mexico and Canada, but also overseas, to actually be distribution facilities that take over for some of the foreign trade zone distribution facilities, and have basically taken away a good part of their business. So I understand their concern and their complaint. CBP is in the middle right now. I mean, we have to enforce the law as it's written, and we encourage them to follow what every American business should do, which is basically take it to their representatives and have them change the law in this particular case.
All right. Thank you for that, Jim. So now I'm going to go back to Brandon. So Brandon, you've alluded to this about the data that we seek to collect, and I'd like you to sort of answer this question in terms of the future state. So we've got several questions about equities between, or maybe inequities between different modes of transportation, and with respect to the data that we already do collect as far as advanced data. And Jim, you talked about this as well, how we use the advanced electronic data for security risk assessment first. But I'm going to throw this to Brandon. Brandon, as we look at this future state and the data that we do collect, how do you see us resolving, or is it, or can we actually resolve the differences between modes? Because in some respects, doesn't that mode of transportation also dictate what kind of data we do need to collect in addition to just the basic stuff we're talking about for e-commerce? So why don't you take a chop on that one, Brandon, and then I'll ask Jim to follow up as well.
Yeah, so that's actually a great question, and one that we get a lot, one that we're still thinking about here, and where I've kind of come to land on that is to say that de minimis at the end of the day is built around speed of clearance, and it is not our intention to slow down speed of clearance. It's our intention to say, in exchange for that continued speed of clearance, given the historic volume of shipments that we're getting, and given the fact that a lot of the players in this de minimis environment now are incredibly unfamiliar with customs procedures and never will become familiar with them, what does the new normal look like in exchange for that speed of clearance? And I honestly believe we can get there across all modes. I think some modes will take longer than others. I think some modes will have to readjust some of their processes to meet certain new security data requirements that we're considering. But I think at the end of the day, our goal is to continue to facilitate as much of these packages as possible with this enhanced data, so that we can double down our scrutiny on those packages that can't meet these new data requirements. We've said to all the trade participants on the e-commerce task force that this is something that the agency has been very serious about over the last 2 or 3 years. Ted mentioned the acting commissioner and the 2 ACs speaking to this group. This is one of those things where if you haven't been paying attention to de minimis space in the last 2 or 3 years, I really urge you to start paying attention now, because the agency, CBP, has been very clear that the current environment, the current regime of data that we get to segment risk and facilitate trade is not adequate for the volume that we're seeing, and is not adequate for the various players and the complex supply chains that often don't present clear actors to us to evaluate risk against. So things need to change. And again, our focus on that is how do we do it while still preserving the speed of clearance? And so I'm optimistic that we can close that gap. And I'm acknowledging that there is a gap that exists right now in different modes. But it is going to require changes on both sides. It's going to require changes in CBP's internal processes and changes to the trade community's processes. But rest assured, this is not something that we intend to suddenly roll out in a short period of time. This is one of those things that will take a while to roll out. There will be an adjustment period. There'll be room to comment on proposed rules. We want to do this together, but we're all going to have to change together and sort of take that plunge. And Jim, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to those thoughts.
So, Jim, did you have anything you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. And yeah, just a couple things. I receive calls pretty much every day or emails from various partners in the trade who want to expand specifically into the ocean mode, mainly because of the lack of heavy air carriage and the lack of passenger air and the belly space and passenger air. The cost of air freight has gone up dramatically. And as a result, they're trying to leverage and modify their supply chains to take advantage of the huge capacity and relatively inexpensive rates that they can achieve in the ocean environment. However, the piece that stood in their way is a piece that has been a cornerstone of our national security process since 9/11, which is the ISF, the security filing that's required of every ocean ship. The problem with the ISF was it was really devolved around the traditional model where the U.S. importer had a great deal of information and the carrier had more, and we pieced those together in an early filing in order to try to alleviate security concerns. This model is different. The data doesn't work quite the same. And as a result, we're taking a very long look at what kind of data we need to collect earlier enough in the chain to mitigate those national security risks and to apply them to the release of these transactions. We think we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet in terms of the ability to be able to say, ocean, maybe you can file without an ISF. If you file an ISF at this level, or there's other processes. We're still working our way through that. There's a lot of work to be done there, because to get to ISF was a 2-year process of a very large team of people looking at the data and how it works. I think we're in the process of redoing that, and especially as it applies to e-commerce. So I would not give up hope. I think we're going to get there. I just don't know exactly when or how we're going to get there yet.
All right, thank you,
Overacker.
Yeah, go ahead.
Overacker, if you don't mind. If I can pile on here, I'm kind of a related. I had my hand up that I wanted to speak, but then I realized, of course, all you saw was my headshot there. So really, one of the things I wanted to bring up is something that we've bandied about in many of our discussions, is the anxiety not of having too many multiple disparate messages related to a single e-commerce shipment. And I think, there's something that I know Customs is working toward that, and both Brandon and Jim spoke to that as well. One of the things you look at it's a $20 pair of socks that are being imported. And if it's coming by air, we're going to have an ACAS message, we're going to have an AMS message, maybe an entry message, maybe whatever else that's related to that. And again, it's a $20 pair of socks. So I am not, trying to disparage socks. Socks are wonderful, but my point is the idea that we need to be cautious if we can as we build out these messaging. And I know that's part of the thought behind the hybrid messaging that we hope to go forward with, is that not only do we address the idea of a message that meets everyone's purposes, but ideally minimize the number of messages that we're all passing around, and CBP is having to manage in this environment. So it's something else to consider, please.
No, thank you, Ted. I really appreciate that. And I just want you guys to know that from my perspective, and Jim alluded to it, Ted, you're talking about it as well, this idea of rethinking all of the AED we collect and making certain that we're collecting only the bare minimum we need to do our job. And if that means we can clean up some of these historic legacy ways of doing business and change it, then let's see if we can't do that. In other words, we're trying to prepare ourselves for the future. We're trying to get our data regime such that it meets the needs of the future without being redundant and overly burdensome. I'm glad you brought up that issue of that $20 pair of socks, and because you're absolutely right. When we talk about a $20 pair of socks, we could get as many as 3 different data transmissions for that one thing. So how can we minimize that? So the burden to the trade, whether it's the carriers or freight forwarders or brokers or anybody, so that it's the minimum amount of data we absolutely need. And hopefully what we're learning from these 2 endeavors right now, the 321 data pilot as well as the Type 86 test, is how we can actually do that in the future. And that's my commitment, is to try to minimize the impact and make sure we get what we need, but at the same time, we don't overly burden you to provide us additional information. We don't want to be redundant in any way, shape, or form. So now, if I could, I want to shift gears to another question we've gotten. We've had several around this type, and Rory, I'm going to ask you to answer this one, and then if we could, maybe we can have a couple other folks chime in on their opinion. So you mentioned in your opening remarks the TIFTIA and the support for raising the de minimis amount from $200 to $800. And of course, a lot of folks look at that now and they think, oh, wow, look at where we are now. Was it because of the $800 or not? I don't know what they're thinking. I have my opinion, but one of the questions we get on a regular basis, are we contemplating changing that $800 and maybe going back to $200 or changing it to something else? From your perspective, Rory, what do you think about the current $800 de minimis amount?
Yeah, I think the $800 amount, it's where Congress intended it to be. I think it's what Congress's intent remains to be. I have not, heard any interest from Capitol Hill in lowering the threshold. As far as whether or not the $800 level is the cause of our increase in volumes, I mean, I'm sure it helped facilitate some of that, but it also coincided with the real boom of e-commerce in general. And I think that was something that was probably unanticipated, that those things would coincide so quickly and ramp up so quickly. But I think the threshold has facilitated a lot of good, as well as some hiccups. But I think the good is over. Is the good side of it is more than the bad. We hear from constituents all the time that have access to markets that they wouldn't have with their small businesses, and they get a lot of the goods that they sell or the inputs that they sell by via de minimis shipments, because they're small and they're a small environment, and we haven't. So I mean, I guess that being said, we just see those benefits outweighing the risks at this point, and I think a lot of the points that have been made thus far with other solutions around data and targeting and partnerships with the private sector is really the way to go here.
And right, thank you. And you mentioned this idea of that, whether the $800 really caused where we are today or whether it just coincided with the explosion of e-commerce. I would suggest that as we look at our data here within CBP, and we analyze a lot of data every day, I would say that even if we still were at $200, we would still have the very same explosion and growth that we have right now. Maybe not quite, but it would be very, very close.
I think that's a great point. I think as we look at data, also, I think the last number I saw is the average shipment, e-commerce shipment is under $60. So I don't think that lowering the threshold to even NAFTA levels would have that big of an effect on what we're seeing today.
All right, thank you, Rory. So now for Brandon, I want to talk a little bit about our partner government agencies and complying with their regulatory requirements. The Type 86 test was originally thought as being a way to collect information to identify those shipments that would require some form of partner government agency review. So with respect to both Type 86 test or the Section 321 or just de minimis shipments in general, what more can or should we be doing with respect to ensuring that these shipments are compliant with PGA requirements?
Yes, that's a great question, and certainly one of the things that we're looking at in this next kind of AED 2.0, if you will, or for de minimis shipments. What really has kind of focused our attention on this is, and I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I think I can safely say well over 90, maybe even 95-ish%. Jim probably has got a good number of the entry type 86 submissions received to date have actually been disclaims. They've been submissions to say that, yes, this HTS is regulated by a specific PGA, but here's the code saying why I don't actually need to provide the PGA message data set. And so that's a high number, especially compared to your standard commercial imports. So there's something going on there. To us, that speaks to just the strong desire for electronic clearance. But when we talk about how do we sort of get all of our processes as a one U.S. government on the same page for de minimis, I think this is something that is going to take even longer, unfortunately, than the new enforcement and facilitation framework that I've been talking about and that Jim's been talking about. And the reason why I think that is because we've evolved as a customs agency. We've evolved into an all threats border agency that's responsible for enforcing national security threats, the traditional customs laws, as well as the laws of partner government agencies and regulations of partner government agencies, well over 40 of them. And the concept of de minimis is something that, frankly, dates back to the founding of the Customs Service and just gets to, do I want to expend the cost to collect a certain amount of money? As a one U.S. border agency where we're charged with protecting against all these threats, I would argue that that concept is outdated, right? And while it's still a good tool to say, as the U.S. government, here's where we're willing to not expend a lot of effort in looking at goods for duty purposes, that conversation is completely turned on its head when you talk about some of the risks that PGAs manage, right? So you're bringing in samples of animal blood. The value is inconsequential to FDA or any other agency that might regulate that import. So this is going to be a process, and it's something that I've certainly talked about in any briefings I have an opportunity to give on Capitol Hill, to just put out there that I truly think at some point, and I'm talking longer term than the framework we just said, we're going to have to think through what a one USG de minimis means, and I don't think it can be a dollar value.
All right, thank you very much, Brandon. So along these lines about not just PGA, but where are we going with the future of 321 on and also Type 86? Jim, this is a question for you. Truck and air environment, in particular the truck environment, how does this Section 321 issue play out with trucks? And really, in other words, are we going to phase out 321 in trucks and require Type 86 at any time?
So no decision's been made on that at this time. Truck does allow for you to use and file at the time of manifest and get clearance on your Section 321 goods, because the officer in the booth, where there's an officer at every booth, at every truck crossing, who's actually reviewing that in real time, makes a determination based on the risk information you've provided. We do the risk assessment, and we make a determination at that time as to whether or not to release you. So your release is upon arrival or upon completion of all of your customs processes in the truck side. So we already are, it's akin to what we were doing in the express consignment environment, where we were trying to keep the velocity up. Knowing the trucks were backing up, we were trying to create a situation where I'm bouncing in and out here, or a series of small packages that they were bringing in and providing us information on. For regular air, we had not anticipated doing that. That was not the process. So we once e-commerce started in the air environment, obviously we looked at what it would take to get to a manifest, but that based on what we looked at, the entry type 86 was a better option going forward in the short term, because we wanted to be able to also accommodate the PGA requirements and give a total solution across the board for that. So entry type does work in truck. They can supply it at the level of at the manifest level for that truck for each individual shipment, or they can request clearance on the manifest right now. But they do have to manifest every shipment And that's a big part of what their changes we made to the manifest system, for example, earlier last year, where we created the ability for them to file all of the data elements on that truck, and have removed that administrative exemption we put into play around Section 321 by requiring them to file all those shipments on the truck. So that was step one. Step two is we're going to evaluate this, and when we come up with a hybrid solution or a real solution on this, we're going to make some decisions as to what that's going to look like, and it's going to be equal across the board, we believe. The goal is to standardize this process for all modes, link it into how we do our business across the board, not just for e-commerce, and try to build the niche market for e-commerce to ensure that it's standardized, it follows the processes, it doesn't require a lot of additional programming by anyone because it's information they already do. Simply, how do we collect that information and tie it in on our side of the house to make sure that when it shows up at the border, we release it, whether that's by truck, ocean, air, or by postal service.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. So we also have another question, and this goes along the lines of what we were discussing earlier with respect to how we're going to harmonize data. And you talked about this a little bit, Jim, but I'll answer this one directly, and that is, we reference ISF. Are we thinking of ISF in other modes? And I think the answer is no, but we are thinking about reevaluating how ISF works and to make certain that whatever we collect in whichever mode, that we're collecting the minimum amount of data that we require in order to do our risk assessment, but also the minimum amount of data, in such a way that you who has to transmit that data to us, so that we have that, so that it's meaningful to you and that you have it, and we collect it from the right entity. One of the things that has come up over these last several months is this idea of uniformity across modes, and this issue of ISF comes up, as does ACAS come up. We're not contemplating ACAS for trains, and we're not talking about ISF for truck, but we are talking about thinking long and hard about all of the data we collect and making certain that our next step is to really make that data collection meaningful and not onerous to the trade community. In other words, nothing is sacred right now. Just because we've had ISF going back to the mid-2000s doesn't mean we have to preserve it and forever. We can rethink how it works and apply what we've learned recently as a result of these pilots so that we can position ourselves in the future to address e-commerce, whichever direction it goes. I talked about being adaptive, being agile. That's what we mean by that. So the question about what becomes of ISF or other types of advanced data requirements as we go forward, the real answer is watch this space, and we're going to work with you, and we're going to want your input on how we create a new advanced electronic data regime for the future. So one last question before we go back to our panelists for some closing thoughts, and this one I'm going to throw out to Brandon first. Talk a little bit about what we see as far as through our analytics as potential revenue loss as a result of these activities in e-commerce, and what analysis have we as an agency embarked upon to try to get a better understanding of the impacts that these changes have and how e-commerce is changing our ability as an agency to protect the revenue, but also how we analyze these activities going forward so that we can address evaders and address other areas of risk.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack in that question. I will do my best to address each piece of that. So first, how do we analyze this space and identify potential revenue loss? What we've really started to do recently is take a look at where we're seeing regular recurring patterns of same shipper, same consignee pairing, and we're seeing that occur at large volume. And what we're finding is that practice is unfortunately prevalent. It's clearly in violation of the per package per day a little unknown to us in terms of how much revenue we're leaving on the table, or how much all that merchandise is valued. But we've really undertaken a period here where we're reaching out to those filers of those manifests, and we're making them aware that this is what we're seeing, especially in regards to the recent administrative ruling that we just issued around unsold merchandise in the de minimis environment. Which if you're not familiar with that administrative ruling, in a nutshell, it just simply says if merchandise is entering the United States through the de minimis environment that has not been sold yet, in other words, the owner of the merchandise is a foreign entity, and you're sending that to a warehouse or a fulfillment center waiting for a sale, that fulfillment center or that warehouse will act as the U.S. consignee, the person, if you will, absent additional information about that foreign owner. We could have a whole separate conversation around, the ins and outs of this, but I encourage all of you to go out and look at that ruling if you haven't already. Needless to say, we have the analytics in place, and we have the processes in place to start identifying where we're seeing, sort of repeat violators. And our concern, first and foremost, is there a security risk? And if there isn't a security risk, the second is, how do we bring these folks into compliance? And we've been working really closely with Jim and his shop, on that effort to date. And so, de minimis continues to pose a challenge to us in terms of how does it change our enforcement capabilities? How does it change our revenue collection capabilities? Continues to pose that challenge because, one, we'll never staff our way out of the problem. We'll never seize our way out of the problem. I'm not even necessarily convinced we're going to, data collection our way out of the problem. But I think, working together with some changes to our data collection processes, absolutely, with some additional technology and screening and analytics on our side, plus the good partnership that we've built up with the trade community over the years, I do think that we will get to a point where we're able to say a very large percentage of these de minimis packages can move at the speed that everybody expects, which will, again, allow us to double down our personnel resources on that segment that we have those concerns against.
All right. Thank you very much, Brandon. We're getting near the end of the session, and so what I'd like to do now is kind of give each of our panelists an opportunity to kind of share their thoughts, their parting shots on this topic of e-commerce. And I'm going to ask each and every one of them to think of this in terms of not just a summary of what the points that you were trying to make today, which I'd like to hear from each of you, but what do you see as the greatest challenges that we face as we grapple with this just monumental change as a result of e-commerce? So those greatest challenges, and where do you think we also have the greatest opportunities for success? And with that, I'm going to reach out to our licensed customs broker on the panel, Mr. Ted Henderson. So Ted, I know that we get to see your mugshot and we don't actually get to see you on camera, but we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts about, one, what are the greatest challenges that you see, and where are the greatest opportunities for success?
All right. So thank you, Mr. Overacker. I think the challenge is that we're nowhere near done, and I think we've all talked about this in one way or another. And I can't stress from a private sector perspective how much work has gone into addressing the challenges of e-commerce imports from so many members of the trade, whether it's COAC, TSN, industry associations, working groups, the task force, ad nauseum. I mean, so many folks have poured so much into trying to make this happen, and we're not there yet. So we've got a ways to go, and we have to stay engaged. This isn't something we can ignore from the private sector, from the trade, and certainly you can't ignore it from CBP, the government perspective. So we've got to keep working through these challenges. The challenge is the challenge of coming up with a rational way to customs to get the information they need to release the shipments and yet not make it too painful and onerous on the trade. I think you actually alluded to this a little bit earlier, XT Overacker, in some of your comments when you were talking about, the thinking that, look, CBP has to be innovative and adaptive and agile as they're looking at this. And I think, e-commerce really nicely dovetails with the 21 CCF initiative, which we're going to hear from the panel tomorrow on this. I mean, it really goes in line with rethinking what CBP does. And I really appreciate Brandon's comments. And, as you noted, I started in this industry before I went to the dark side as a customs officer, and just I'll do a quick prior disclosure and tell you that not only was my father a customs officer, my mommy was a customs officer, and so I am fully cognizant of the history of customs from 1789 forward. But it is time for a change, and that is the future. I mean, and again, I really would say that e-commerce it just really nicely dovetails with 21 CCF. So I'm hoping that's really part of the way forward for us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Ted. Really appreciate you jumping in on the panel at the last minute and sharing those thoughts with us. Particularly, we needed to hear from somebody in the brokerage community and somebody in the trade community about what they're thinking. And one question I do want to ask you on a redirect, if I could, please. When we talk about building out the regime of the future, if you will, from a trade perspective, inevitably there are going to be some costs associated with that, whether it's new automation, new software, new vendor packages, or whatever. What level of concerns do you have for the trade community as we go forward with respect to the pace and the level of change that we might actually implement in the future?
Well, excuse me. I think really the transition from ACS to ACE was really kind of got us on the new way of thinking and going to agile systems development and thinking in a different model of having to invest in systems. I mean, certainly all of us who are in the customs brokerage community, we had to modify our software, and the software providers who are in the business had to do that work. We all had to work towards that. Suddenly we were building PGA message sets that had never been seen before. But I think that transition to ACE probably stands up as a pretty good example of what we can do going forward in the e-commerce environment. I mean, frankly, at the beginning, it was a lot of work for us to communicate with our customers that, look, we need this new data, but we believe there will be a return on that investment. Certainly it's a financial investment for us, but the data that you're going to have to do, changing your business processes. And so we communicated what we perceived to be the benefit. When we went live with ACE and we did start rolling out the message sets and we started changing the way we communicated with CBP in that traditional entry environment, those benefits did come through. Faster release times, fewer document requests, all down the line. And I think probably that same model will show up in the e-commerce space. Yes, we are going to have to invest, but again, as we keep talking about, this is such a huge component of the import environment now that we have no choice. Certainly as service providers, we will make that investment, but I think everyone gets it, that we've got to jump on board. And again, if there are tangible benefits for the investment, people are fine with that.
All right, thank you very much, Ted. We really appreciate you being on the panel. So now I'm going to flip it to Rory. So Rory, I'm going to ask you the same thing. From your perspective, what's the greatest challenge that we have as a government going forward? And where do you see the greatest opportunities for success? Sure.
So, on the challenges side, I mean, it's been stated a few times, but I just don't, we can't force our way out of this. So we have to come up with other solutions. And I think one of those things is going to have to be working with our trading partners. I mean, most of the illicit goods that come to this country come from 2 or 3 countries, and getting them to really crack down on their side is going to be key to that. And that's going to be a challenge. I mean, our relationship with China is tenuous at best right now. One bright spot is the Phase 1 trade deal. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind. And within that trade deal, there were provisions on stopping illicit goods, opioids, counterfeits, and so we need to make sure that we hold China accountable to those. Getting the correct data and then just the volumes of shipments are some more of the challenges. But I do think some of the successes that we can have, especially as these pilots move forward, is creating deeper partnerships with the private sector. I really do think that's going to be key. Getting the information from the private sector that they have into your analytics would go a long way to help stop the bad actors. And then just continuing on with the data analytics.
All right, thank you for that, Rory. We really appreciate you being on the panel with us today. Like I said earlier, usually you're the one asking me the questions. So it was nice to have a little bit of a role reversal today. Let's go to Jim Swanson. Jim, briefly, can you just give us your perspective on what is the greatest challenge you see in your seat here at CBP, and where's the greatest opportunity for success in the future?
So to me, the greatest challenge right now is that continued cooperation and collaboration to build a consensus model around this, to say we're building a consensus model that says this is the path forward, and how do we get to that point? And it's always difficult given things like the Trade Secrets Act, the Privacy Act, other data sharing issues. How much data can we share? Who can we share it with? We're starting to build some models to share those analytics now. We have some authority to share additional information. So we're looking to how do we push that information out to say, okay, here's what we're seeing. Here's where we need your help. Brandon brought that up in terms of eligibility for 321. We're kind of feeding their data back to them, back to the providers of that data, and letting them work with us to try to bring those numbers down. So that challenge of building that collaborative model where we work together to come to a solution, I think we're well down the road of it. We've spent a lot of time doing it, but the challenge continues, and we will continue to go. The biggest opportunity I see is when we normalize this. The opportunity is to normalize e-commerce, and in some point in the future, not have to have these discussions about how we're going to do it, and we can start getting to the next problem that pops up. But we really need to get this normalized and get it in a situation where we all understand the universe, we all understand how it works, we know who the good actors are, and from there we can find the bad actors. That to me is the best opportunity we have out of all this work we're doing.
And now let me turn to Brandon. Brandon, just to sum up real quickly, what are the challenges we face, and where's the greatest opportunity for success?
Absolutely. Thank you, XD Overacker, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. I want to be mindful of people's time, so I'll make this real quick. So to me, the biggest challenge continues to be the fact that we are dealing with small businesses, small sellers that are able to access global supply chain networks and not even realize that they're doing it. And being able to sort of separate those folks that are running legitimate businesses from those that maybe aren't, right? And so how do we do that, again, while maintaining the speed of clearance that everyone has come to expect, or I'll say the ease of clearance to expect in the de minimis mode. In terms of opportunities, I agree wholeheartedly with what Jim just said. We have an opportunity here to normalize this. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, when the opioid crisis really started going, that really crystallized CBP internally to say, we've got to get our arms around this problem. And I think in my mind, I see us being able to do that. I see a path to do that, whereas 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't see a path. And I think what we've done with the partnerships that we've built through the e-commerce task force and other outreach efforts are critical to getting that done. And if we do our job right, we will follow that sort of established playbook, smartly gathering new and innovative data where appropriate without overreaching or being a data grab, in exchange for predictable clearance times, electronic clearance, better risk segmentation, which of course builds the foundation for some kind of a trusted trader program, right? We talked a little bit about CTPAT. I think it's early days there, but you heard from XD Overacker that we're acknowledging as an agency that there's room to do something here. And so how do we smartly do all those things? I think we have all the opportunity in the world to tackle those.
Much, Brandon. And thank all of you who have joined us today. This has been a great session, and this new technology that we're working with, I think we pulled it off pretty well, if you ask me. I just want to say to all of you, before I turn this back over to Val Newhart, stay safe, stay safe, stay safe. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. Stay safe. I echo XD Overacker. Thank you very much.